the majority of 5 objectives on the respiratory system. So yeah, I'll let you turn around, face the backboard, bring up your notes from yesterday. All right, so yesterday, the first objective that we covered is an IB objective saying distinguish between ventilation, gas exchange, and cell respiration. Without looking at your notes, I would ask one of you to define ventilation for me and tell me where it occurs. Without looking at your notes. Fish sticks.
Gas exchange.
Nope.
Lungs and air.
Close. Close. It is the site of exchange between the lungs and the air. But you use the word gas exchange, which IB would not give you credit for because that's a separate concept. So in order to define ventilation, you would say it is the site of exchange between the lungs and the air. And what part of the body would this occur? What cavity? Would it be in the abdominal cavity? The thoracic cavity. Good. So this is up in the thoracic cavity, which we talked about yesterday, which is between the throat and the diaphragm. Okay. How about gas exchange as a separate concept? Tell me what it means and where it occurs. Yes?
It's the uptake of O2 and the release of CO2, and it occurs in the lungs, which are in the thoracic cavity.
Close. Your definition is correct. The uptake of O2 and release of CO2. It occurs in the alveoli, which are surrounded by capillaries in the lungs, and the body tissues, all the cells in your body that have capillaries supplying them. Both sites are going to have gas exchange. All right? The third idea, cell respiration. Tell me what it is and where it occurs. Chloe Rowe.
It's the production of ATP because mitochondria and the cells.
Yes, it is the most efficient means of producing ATP. It requires, aerobic respiration requires oxygen, and it occurs in the mitochondria in your cells. Excellent. Okay? That's objective 1. Any questions about objective 1 from yesterday's lecture? Nope. All right, review yesterday. Objective 2, draw and label the ventilation system, including the nose, mouth, trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, and alveoli. Are we comfortable doing that? That's, again, based on the drawing that I had on the board yesterday we talked about. Yes?
If IB asks that question, like diagram ventilation system, is the diaphragm included?
Absolutely. Good question. Her question was, does the diaphragm need to be included in your drawing? Yes. It is an important part of the ventilation system. Remember that during rest, your diaphragm is contracting down, expanding the volume of the thoracic cavity, creating a negative pressure situation, which we talked about yesterday, drawing your breath in. And then when the diaphragm relaxes, it returns up, which decreases the volume of the thoracic cavity, increases the pressure, and forces the air out of your system. So the diaphragm is important, not only at rest, but also during exercise, which we're going to go into. That's the next objective that we talked about yesterday. Question?
So when we breathe, air is just being forced in and out? It's like,
When you breathe, you're creating a pressure gradient in your body. So when you inhale, you have a negative pressure internal relative to your external environment. When you exhale, you reverse that, and so you have a greater pressure inside than outside, forcing air out. And it's a result of the contraction of specific muscles, which is the next objective we're going to talk about. Okay? Yeah? Good question. I don't know. There were researchers that did some cool science experiments. His question was how'd they find that out? I don't know. We could probably Google it and figure it out. But somebody really cool did it. Yeah. I don't think it was magic, but... All right. The third objective. Wait, that's the second one. Any other questions about drawing, labeling, and describing the parts of the ventilation system? That's from yesterday's lecture. No? Objective 3. Explain the mechanism of ventilation caused by the intercostal muscles, the diaphragm, and the abdominal muscles. We talked about this yesterday. As a review. Tell me, we talked just now, I answered a question for Clobro about the diaphragm. During rest, it's mainly the diaphragm contracting down and relaxing up, creating that volume change, which creates a pressure change. What about during exercise? Is it just the diaphragm that's helping you during exercise? No. PJ, you want to elaborate?
There are intercostal muscles.
Yes, there are intercostal muscles in your ribs, in between your ribs. The external intercostal muscles pull the chest upward and outward, increasing the volume of the chest cavity, thoracic cavity. Question?
So both internal and external intercostal muscles are inside of the ribs?
They're called intercostal. The costal region is an angle, actually, from your ribs. Okay, it's where the ribs come out. That's called the costal region. And the intercostal means between the ribs.
Okay.
So you have external and internal intercostal muscles. The external ones pull the rib cage up and out. The internal ones pull it down and in. So which one is associated with inhalation? The external, pulling it up and out. And which one is associated with exhalation? The internal, pulling it down and in. All right? So during exercise, PJ's right. You've got external and internal intercostal muscles. I'm hearing a lot from this side of the room over here. Middle section and the right section of the room. Tell me, other than the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, what other muscle group is helping us breathe during exercise? Yeah, beast. The abdominal muscles. Excellent. Do you know their role? You help me with that one. Somebody else tell me their role. The diaphragm, I'm going to help. Yeah, Chelsea? Yeah, they push the diaphragm up. So the diaphragm contracts down and then relaxes up. Contracts down and relaxes up. When you're exercising, you're breathing heavily, you contract the diaphragm down, and then your abdominal muscles help push that back up to create higher pressure and getting that air out of the lungs. All right? Question?
Well, can, let's say you just breathe really, really hard. Would it be possible to, tone your muscles at all? Or is that,
all right. So the question was, can you get a six-pack from breathing really, really hard?
Yeah.
It's going to take more than that, right? So,
would it help?
So deep breathing. Okay, so let me go through a couple things. One, deep breathing can actually help relax the body and put it in a state of rest. So if you slowly draw deep breaths in, deep breaths out, you can actually lower your heart rate and lower your breathing rate. You're asking about the opposite case. Could you accelerate these things and tone your muscles? Muscle tone and definition is a separate process. So while these muscles are used for breathing, toning and building muscle requires other aspects, which we're going to talk about when we hit the muscular system. I don't want to go into it too much today. But I can tell you, no. That would be an awesome exercise. Let's get a six-pack. Right? That would be sweet. But it's not how it works. Yeah, it's a separate process. So we'll learn more about muscle definition, muscle toning, building muscle, in another unit. All right? Other questions? Those are the first three objectives from yesterday. How about objective 4, features of the alveoli? They're still up on the board. Yeah? This is objective 4. Are there any questions about those objectives, or that objective? We good on that? And then the last objective is the big question, why? Why do we need to respire? Why do we need to have a ventilation system? What's the point? And the short answer is, we had 6 parts yesterday, right? What are those 6 steps to tell you why we need to breathe? Press dog.
From work to cellular respiration, cellular respiration needs oxygen to CO2.
Stop. Good. I'm going to repeat it for the video recording. All right. So step 1, if you're alive, your cells are requiring energy. That energy comes in the form of ATP, which is the result of cellular respiration, which requires oxygen and produces carbon dioxide. That's step 1. Step 2.
You need water and carbon dioxide together in the bloodstream, and that makes the water.
Your body is composed of a lot of water. In fact, your blood has a large component of it that's water. And when that water combines with the carbon dioxide gas, it forms carbonic acid, which I have here in the top equation. Water plus carbon dioxide forming carbonic acid in your blood. That's step 2. What does that carbonic acid do to your blood? Yes? It lowers the pH. Excellent. I was looking elsewhere, but you had the right answer. Lowers the pH from 7.4 to sub 7.4. And then the blood does what? Circulates through your body and hits sensors that are located in the heart and in the brain, specifically the medulla and the aorta, have pH sensors that say, we're becoming more acidic, our pH is getting lower, so we should increase our heart rate and our breathing rate. Good job, Crest Dog and Julie. Well done. We know that the medulla is connected via nerves to the SA node in the heart in the right atrium, and it stimulates and accelerates the heart. You guys are with me then? So we have increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, because we have nerve from the medulla actually attached to the diaphragm, attached to the intercostal muscles, attached to the abdominal muscles, causing you to breathe faster. Yes? Never mind? Okay. You can always email me. That's all review from yesterday. We spent a lot of time on that. Right? We spent a lot of time reviewing it. But it's important that you can do this and demonstrate your mastery of this by writing essays about it. Drawing, labeling, talking, explaining. Yes? All right. Let's pick up where we ended yesterday. We ended by talking about, I think it was Bohr shift, right? We ended with the Bohr shift. Did this make sense to you guys, or was this graph still confusing yesterday? No? Shaking your head no means not making sense? All right, I'm going to go through it a little bit today. The Bohr shift. If you look at the top line on this graph, and I drew it for you yesterday, and you to draw it in your notes as we went through it, right? The y-axis represents oxygen saturation. So in your cells, how much oxygen there will be in those particular types of cells. And there's three types we talked about. We talked about cells that are at rest, cells that are exercising, and cells in your lungs. All right? So on this normal curve, how much saturation do we have for those three types of tissue? The x-axis is the partial pressure of oxygen, which is measured using mercury. It's a pressure exerted by a gas. An easy way to think of it for this class is how much oxygen is available. All right? So, if you look at this curve, the three tissue types. Tissues at rest are about 70% saturated. So right now, you're sitting in this class, bored out of your mind because it's a lecture day. You're like, oh, here we go again. You have your tissues about 70% saturated with oxygen. There are tissues in your system right now that are actually doing work. You ate lunch earlier, right? So you're still processing that food, digesting that food. There are cells that are doing work. Those cells doing work have less oxygen available to them because they've been using the oxygen to perform cellular respiration in order to digest your food. Okay? You guys with me in that? Yes? We know digestion is really more about enzymes than it is about cells, but the point is you have cells in your body that are doing something right now. If you're moving your hands, they're doing cell respiration to get the energy they need. All right? Those cells have less oxygen saturation. They're at about 18%. And your lungs, as you're sitting here breathing, and if you're low and you wanted nap time today, you're breathing really deep because your body is in a restful state, you're saturating your lungs at almost 95% with oxygen. So those are the three tissue types. With me? Yes? With me? Yes? Okay. The Bohr shift comes into play. It's a beautiful mechanism in your body. Right? Bohr actually is it's a chemistry concept, but it applies wonderfully in the human body. As you exercise, or you become more active, so when you leave here and you go hang out with friends, you run around, you're more active than you are right now. And you're going to produce more carbon dioxide gas as a result of that activity. The carbon dioxide gas travels through your body in three ways. One way is it can be dissolved in your blood plasma. And about 5% of the total carbon dioxide that's in your body right now is dissolved in your blood plasma. It can be bound to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is that protein we discussed yesterday. It's at the core of all erythrocytes, red blood cells. It's a protein that has primary structure. That's the sequence of amino acids. Remember this from last year? Secondary structure, tertiary, and quaternary structure. Quaternary structure means subunits that have folded in on each other. Hemoglobin has 4 subunits. Each one has iron at its core. That iron is specifically designed to bind oxygen. So hemoglobin can bind oxygen and carry it around your blood system. In fact, because you've got 4 iron molecules, you can pick up 4 oxygen molecules and carry it as this compound, HbO8. So oxygen is transported by the iron that's in the heme complex of hemoglobin. That part makes sense? Carbon dioxide is also bound to to hemoglobin, but not by iron. It's bound to the amino groups in that protein. We know that proteins are polypeptides, which are comprised of amino acids joined together. Amino acids have an amino group, and that's what binds carbon dioxide. So, about 10% of the carbon dioxide that's in your body right now is bound to the hemoglobin that's circulating through your system. The vast majority, about 85% of the carbon dioxide in your body has dissociated from carbonic acid. We know that acids donate hydrogen ions to solution. So the hydrogen ion can dissociate from carbonic acid, and you have an H plus ion and a separate ion called the bicarbonate ion. And that's the majority of the carbon dioxide in your body system right now. Okay? So how does this pertain to Bohr's shift? Question?
Wait, where exactly are the bicarbonate ions? Like, I understand how they're formed and why they're there, but where are they? What do they do?
Where are they housed?
Yeah.
They're in your blood vessels. And part of the time, and there's a diagram in the textbook that does a pretty good job of this, part of the time they're in the red blood cell, part of the time they're getting reformed into carbonic acid and transferred from one red blood cell to another location. And that's a finer point that you're not going to be tested over. All right? But we just want to know there's three main ways it's transported in the body. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah. All right. So how does this relate to Bohr's shift? Well, here's what happens. You start exercising, and you get more carbonic acid in your blood, and it lowers your pH from 7.4 to 7.2. So now we're at that lower line on this graph. What does that mean for your body tissues? Well, tissues at rest that are normally 70% saturated are now below 70% saturated. In fact, you're closer to 40% saturated. You're exercising, and you have less blood available for the tissues that are, not less blood, less oxygen available for the tissues that are at rest. Your lungs, when you're breathing in and out, are still at a pretty high saturation point, but not as high as 95%. They're brought down a bit. And your exercising cells, those that you're actually moving, so your muscle cells, are requiring a lot of oxygen, and they're going sub 18%. You're getting less than 18% saturation of those. In fact, if you exercise for a long period of time, say you go run 5 miles, you can actually enter anaerobic respiration, where there's not enough oxygen available to your cells, so they do what process? You know this. Lactic acid fermentation. And they generate, your muscle cells can generate lactic acid, which causes your cells to feel sore, causes you to feel sore the next day. So, under exercise conditions, you lower your pH, and your cells have a lower saturation point. Now, why is this such a beautiful thing? You're talking about, oh, this is a beautiful thing. Hemoglobin is a protein. When we studied proteins last year, we learned that proteins are affected by pH. The hemoglobin protein, in the presence of an acidic environment, has a lower affinity for oxygen atoms. So that means it's releasing more oxygen to your cells. So as you exercise and your pH drops and becomes more acidic, hemoglobin responds by releasing more oxygen to those cells that are depleted of oxygen. This prevents you from collapsing under stress conditions when you're exercising. Make sense? Question? Sometimes people do collapse, yeah. Yeah, so generally when people collapse, if they're healthy and it's due to exhaustion, they've pushed themselves to such a point that their muscles aren't able to sustain them anymore. So this is not that condition. This would be beyond that. So this would be a more extreme case if someone actually collapses. And you can Google video this. There's a kind of interesting video about 2 women that competed in an Ironman competition. And they were both winning. They were in first and second place. And they went into failure, muscle failure. And they had to drive to get to the finish line, but they couldn't control their muscles. So there's video of them actually standing up and collapsing. And they're at the finish line. So there's like rows of people cheering them on. And you want to like run out there and just help them, right? That's what I would want to do. But they've worked for so long. And there's actually a condition, I can't remember the name of it. There's a condition when you cannot control your body. They clearly cannot control their body. They start herking and jerking around and collapsing and They're not able to control their body. Google it. It's pretty cool. Did they finish? Yeah. In fact, the woman that was in second place crawled past the woman in first place to win. Yeah, I mean, an Ironman is a full marathon. It's like, I don't know how many miles on the bike. There you go. There you go. Yeah, so it's massive conditions. So, to get to your question, Crestdog, you're saying, well, what about people do collapse sometimes? We're talking about extreme cases, or there could be something else going on with them medically that would cause them to collapse. Right? Okay. That's it in terms of, let's see, we know how to control breathing, we know how, yep. All right, that's it in terms of IB objectives. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about altitude sickness because we live at a higher altitude, and I want to talk a little bit about circular breathing. Some people that study voice, or actually it's more for instrumentation. So, like, if you are using a didgeridoo is one example of this. Yeah, you know how didgeridoos are like they're actually able to do circular breathing. I'm losing you. Okay, 12 row. Thank you. All right, so I want to talk altitude sickness and circular breathing. Here we go. Altitude sickness actually has a little bit to do with the bore shift. The partial pressure of oxygen when you get above 6,500 feet drops. So right here we're at 5,280, so we are much higher than sea level. But there's a critical point around 6,500 feet where the partial pressure of oxygen in our atmosphere, so think about atmospheric oxygen, we have less available for our bodies to absorb. So what does this mean? It means you go up in the mountains and you chill at a coffee shop, and you're on the lower curve. You're shifted on the lower curve. There's actually less oxygen. You're shifted down on this curve is what I should say. There's less oxygen to that tissue. So your blood pH may be normal at 7.4, but rather than having 40 millimeters of mercury, you have less than 40, so it puts you lower. So your tissues at rest while you're drinking coffee are getting less saturated with oxygen. You're depleted of oxygen. Not a problem if you're drinking coffee, really. But let's say you go up and you go skiing in the mountains. So you go to Copper Mountain, and there's an elevation at base of like 9,000 feet. You start skiing and exercising. You're doing the moguls, so you're hitting it hard, and you're doing a lot of breathing, a lot of exercising. These tissues that are exercising have a lower partial pressure of oxygen at altitude, so they're less saturated with oxygen. So your muscle cells are going to have less oxygen available to them than they would if you were skiing at sea level. Which would be weird, because you'd be doing moguls on sand. What's that? Water? Yeah, water skiing. True. You can do water skiing. All right. As well, just your normal everyday lungs are going to have issues with saturation at altitude. There's lower partial pressure of oxygen, so you have less saturation of the lungs. How does this affect humans? Well, first week I was here, I went up and I was like, I want to climb a 14er. I'm in Colorado. I came out here for a reason, right? And I'm sitting there huffing and puffing, leaning over the side of, like, on my hands, dying trying to do a 14er. Altitude sickness results in a dilation of the arterioles that are supplying your brain with blood. You dilate the arterioles. Remember we learned about arteries, veins, capillaries. Arterioles are small arteries. They're in the brain. They supply the brain with oxygen. And they actually swell. In the swelling process, it actually leads to a headache. It can lead to disorientation. It can cause dizziness and make you feel nauseous as a result of all that. So those are some symptoms of altitude sickness. Question?
So the arterioles swell because the body tissues are less saturated with oxygen?
Yes. And what's a body tissue that's extremely important to you? Your brain. So you're getting less oxygen to your brain, and your arterioles are swelling to try and provide more oxygen to the brain.
Oh, so wait, how is swelling?
We're going to learn a little bit more about your blood system has fenestrations in it, which means holes, specifically your blood capillaries. And those holes can change size based on conditions. We're going to learn more about that in homeostasis. So when we learn about how you control your body temperature in cold environments and warm environments, it'll also play a role in altitude sickness. So I can address that more there. But the dilation allows for the fenestrations to change and allows for the passage or exchange of things to occur faster. Yeah? So I need to look into that. I'm not a doctor or anything, so I'm not certain how nausea is related, except to say what I felt. When I was feeling sick from altitude, my body was not getting enough oxygen. My brain was like, I was feeling a headache, and I felt dizzy as a result of that. So lack of oxygen can lead to dizziness, right? Dizziness can lead to nausea. So you start to feel sick to your stomach because you're kind of feeling like the world's shifting on you. Okay? The cure for altitude sickness: get out of the altitude. Get down. There are some medications that have been produced that will take care of some of the symptoms, but a couple of things need to happen. One, you should drink more liquid at altitude. So if you're going up for a ski day, you should be drinking lots of liquid. That is partially because you get dehydrated in combination with what we've discussed already. When you start breathing faster at altitude to get more oxygen into your body, you exhale water vapor. You know how on a cold day when you are breathing you can see your breath? You're seeing water vapor. So if you're breathing faster at altitude, you're actually releasing a lot of water vapor. You can become dehydrated easily if you're not drinking lots of water at altitude. So the combination of feeling dehydrated and having these other symptoms leads to a pretty miserable day. The best way to get rid of that stuff is to get down out of the altitude. Hydrate yourself and get down. You guys have grown up here, don't have an issue with that. Why? How is it that people, and now I can go climb 14 and be fine. Why is that? What do you think? You know what? That's actually, I know that you were being partially facetious there, but people say evolution in the wrong context a lot. What is evolution? Genetic change over time. So are my genes changing? Nope. My genes are not changing. What is changing? My body sends signals. Do you know what happens? Yes. So my genes aren't changing, but my body is signaling we need to make more red blood cells that are specifically designed with the heme complex to carry oxygen. And not only that, which is a good job, sauerkraut, you make more red blood cells, but you also have more hemoglobin in those blood cells to bind that oxygen and carry it. And that usually takes about 3 weeks for your body to adjust. So if you're at altitude for about 3 weeks, you're then producing more red blood cells with more hemoglobin in them. So the symptoms shouldn't be affecting you as much. Yes?
So if you live here and then you go to sea level and stay there for 3 weeks, are we going to lose those extra?
That's a good question. You know, I haven't really looked into how it works the other way around. I can tell you a couple things about that. One, if you go exercise at sea level, and this is just personal experience, you're going to be awesome because your body has adjusted so that you can saturate your cells with oxygen at altitude. You go up to a low altitude where there's higher partial pressure of oxygen, and you're getting more oxygen to your system naturally by breathing that air at a low altitude. You've got more red blood cells with more hemoglobin. You're going to have full saturation. So you should feel pretty good exercising at low altitude. How long does it take to change back? I don't know. I would need to look into it. Logic, your idea seems logically correct. It takes 3 weeks up at altitude, probably 3 weeks down. I need to look. Yeah?
Well, I was going to ask a similar question. How long does it take for your body to adjust to the higher altitude? Because I know in some instances, bike racers will train at higher altitudes.
Yeah.
Than at lower altitudes.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it takes, on average, 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. It varies depending on your body. You can't say, on day X, everyone changes. So it varies. But you're correct. Athletes train at altitude. We know that Lance Armstrong moved to Aspen recently, which is kind of a side note. But the Olympic training facility, where is it located? Colorado Springs. Yeah. All right. So people that train at altitude are doing so to push their body's limits. I want to get away from altitude sickness and talk circular breathing for a second. Are we cool on altitude sickness? By the way, never seen it on an IB test. Just an interesting point because we're here and we live at altitude, and people sometimes come visit us and they feel sick, and you're like, "What do? Get them down and get them water." All right. Any other questions about anything? Or do we know those 5 objectives? Yeah, we're good on that. Okay. I'm going to show you a video on the front board that has to do with circular breathing and the didgeridoo and how it works. All right? So that's going to conclude the lecture. Thanks, David.